The Conjuring is a story. It will say based on a true story. It captures not only our story as the Perron family, but also tells it from the perspective, a very unique perspective, of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
7 deaths, 2 centuries, and 1 isolated Rhode Island farmhouse that refused to stay quiet. When the Perron family bought the property in 1971, they thought they were stepping into a dream home. Instead, they walked into a structural trap. Behind the freshly painted walls and beneath the crumbling fieldstone foundations lay hidden voids, sealed cellars, and secret cavities that held 300 years of buried history and something far worse that was waiting for the light. What was found in the secret rooms of the famous Conjuring house, built on the unburied. In the year 1736, deep within the isolated, tree-choked wilderness of Burrillville, Rhode Island, workmen drove heavy oak posts into the rocky soil to erect the frame of the old Arnold estate. The house was constructed in the traditional New England center chimney style, an architectural design built around a massive central stack of stone and mortar intended to trap heat during the brutal northeastern winters. But in trapping heat, that massive central fireplace also created a maze of dead space, hidden draft shafts, and walled-off alcoves. From the very moment its first timber was notched, the structure was shaped to conceal what lay inside it. The land itself was already steeped in isolation. Set far back from the main colonial carriage roads, the farm was cut out of densely packed forest near Round Top Road. The initial builders, the Richardson family, cleared the granite-laden soil to raise crops and livestock. But within 2 decades, the deed was transferred to Noah Arnold. For the next 8 generations, the property remained almost entirely in the hands of the Arnold family. It was a bloodline that tied itself directly to the soil, working the fields through harsh colonial winters, global pandemics, and bitter local rivalries. But as decade after decade passed, the farm became less known for its crop yields and far more notorious for the sheer density of tragedy that unfolded within its boundaries. Town archives, land deeds, and local probate records from the 18th and 19th centuries paint a chilling portrait of life on the Arnold estate. Death on a colonial farm was hardly unusual, but the frequency and nature of the fatalities recorded on this specific parcel of land were unnerving. Over a span of 2 centuries, the property played host to an extraordinary series of unnatural passings. Official records and regional news accounts document multiple drownings in the nearby creek, sudden infant deaths, and several farmhands who perished under mysterious or brutal circumstances. Among the recorded tragedies were 2 fatal incidents committed on the property, one by poison and another where a family member hanged themselves from a high wooden beam in the barn. There were children who succumbed to violent fevers in the upstairs bedrooms, and laborers who froze to death in the unheated outbuildings during sudden blizzards. One notable town record documents an 11-year-old girl who was brutally murdered near the border of the land, while elderly estate patriarchs died under circumstances so abrupt that rumors of foul play lingered in Burrillville tavern chatter for decades. Even the estate's later owner, Edwin Arnold, vanished without a trace in late October 1903, only for his lifeless body to be discovered weeks later collapsed on a neighboring property. Because New England winters were so unforgiving, and the ground hardened into solid ice for months at a time, colonial families could not always dig deep graves in the frozen earth. Instead, bodies were often kept in cold, dark root cellars beneath the house until the spring thaw allowed for burial. The dry fieldstone basement of the Arnold estate was expanded and partitioned over the years to store root vegetables, salted meats, and, during those long winter months, the deceased waiting for a patch of thawed soil. As the generations passed, the house underwent structural modifications. Rooms were partitioned off, staircases were rerouted to conserve heat, and structural voids were sealed up with lath and plaster to stop biting drafts. Rather than removing old stone foundations, renovations simply built over them, sealing old doorways and trapping air pockets between double walls. By the time the last of the Arnold lineage left the farm, the 14-room farmhouse stood as a physical archive of 200 years of misery, built directly on top of the unburied history of a single family. For over 200 years, those stones kept their quiet, until 1971, when an unsuspecting family unlocked the front door. The Perron nightmare, 10 years in the dark. In January 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron packed up their belongings and moved their 5 young daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, into the historic farmhouse on Round Top Road. To a young family seeking a peaceful life in rural Rhode Island, the sprawling 2-story home, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods, seemed like an idyllic sanctuary. But from the moment the moving truck unloaded its final crate, the environment inside the house shifted. The air felt unnaturally dense, carrying a persistent, sharp chill that oil heaters and snapping fireplace logs could never quite burn away. The former owner left the Perrons with a single cryptic warning as he handed over the keys. "Leave the lights on at night." Within 48 hours, the family understood why. The disturbances did not begin with dramatic, poltergeist-style violence. They started as subtle, invasive nudges that systematically eroded the family's sense of reality. Small household objects went missing, only to reappear in impossible locations hours later. Doors opened and closed on their own, their heavy iron latches lifting with a distinct metallic click when no one was near. As weeks bled into months, the phenomena escalated into distinct sensory violations. A suffocating stench would suddenly fill specific rooms without warning. A sickly sweet, putrid odor, resembling rotting meat or decaying flesh, that hovered in midair for 20 minutes before vanishing entirely. In the dead of night, the silence of the house was shattered by rhythmic, deliberate sounds emanating from within the walls. The children reported hearing the dry sound of broom bristles sweeping across the wooden floorboards in empty rooms above their bedrooms, followed by soft, muffled whispers echoing up through the heat registers. It wasn't long before the auditory encounters manifested as physical entities. The 5 young sisters began encountering figures drifting silently through the hallways. Some appeared completely harmless, almost sorrowful, like the spirit of a woman who would quietly enter the bedrooms at night, gently kiss the girls on their foreheads, and tuck their blankets in before fading into the shadows. Another figure, believed to be a former farmhand or domestic worker, was frequently seen sitting quietly in the kitchen corner, staring fixedly into the hearth with an expression of profound, empty despair. However, not every presence in the house was benign. As the months turned into years, a far malevolent force began to dominate the property, an entity that focused its relentless hostility squarely on Carolyn Perron. Unlike the gentle spirits that drifted harmlessly past, this presence made its weight violently felt. Carolyn experienced intense, localized cold drops where the ambient temperature would plunge in seconds, leaving her gasping for breath as frost formed on her breath inside the living room. She began waking up in the early morning hours to find herself paralyzed in bed, feeling an unbearable pressure crushing down on her chest, as if an invisible, weightless mass was kneeling on her torso. The entity's physical interactions became increasingly aggressive. Carolyn suffered unexplained physical scratches that would manifest across her skin in raised, burning welts. Heavy iron cookware hung above the stove would suddenly swing violently or fly off hooks, crashing onto the pine floors. On multiple occasions, invisible hands forcefully slapped, shoved, or pinched the family members as they walked down the narrow staircases, turning simple trips between floors into dangerous tests of survival. What horrified the parents most was the entity's apparent omniscience regarding the physical layout of the house. It knew every structural secret, every hollow space, and every hidden void behind the walls. It used the house as an acoustic amplifier, driving the sound of heavy boots stomping across the attic floor directly over the girls' beds, or scratching frantically against the plaster from inside sealed, windowless closets. Roger Perron, initially a staunch skeptic who searched for rational explanations like foundation shifts, settling timber, or field mice, eventually found himself unable to debunk what his family was enduring. Financial constraints trapped the family inside the house. With 5 daughters to support and their savings tied up in the real estate purchase, the Perrons had nowhere else to go. They were forced to adapt to a life of perpetual vigilance, learning to coexist with an unseen terror that dictated when they could sleep, where they could walk, and how long they could remain in a room alone. For 10 long years, from 1971 to 1981, the Arnold estate held the Perron family captive within its dark perimeter, turning their quiet homestead into an isolation chamber where the boundaries between the living and the dead were erased entirely. The terror wasn't just in what the family saw. It was hidden inside the physical architecture of the home itself, the secret rooms. A secret architecture, hidden cavities, and cursed voids. The farmhouse was not constructed in a single fluid phase of modern building design. It was an evolving organism built across 2 centuries of piecemeal expansion, emergency winter modifications, and structural improvisations. In 18th century New England, homeowners frequently altered floor plans to trap heat, isolate dampness, or store provisions. In doing so, they created a labyrinth of concealed spaces, structural pockets, dead voids between partition walls, and subterranean chambers that effectively converted the house into a massive acoustic resonator. At the epicenter of this dark layout lay the stone basement, a subterranean cellar hand-dug beneath the original 1736 structure. Unlike modern concrete basements designed with high ceilings and uniform drainage, this cellar was carved directly into the rocky glacial till of Rhode Island. Its walls were constructed of heavy, mortarless fieldstones stacked on top of one another, forming thick, weeping barriers that absorbed the chill of the earth year-round. Deep within this basement sat the dirt room, an unpaved root cellar recessed into the rear foundation wall. It was here that early residents stored perishables during the summer heat and preserved frozen game during dead winter locks. The air down there remained thick with the smell of wet soil, iron rust, and stagnant decay, a damp pocket completely isolated from the rest of the world. Branching off from this central basement were a series of narrow, low-clearance crawl spaces that extended beneath the newer additions of the house. These forgotten stone passages were barely 3 feet high, floored with raw dirt, and swallowed in absolute darkness. Originally designed for plumbing access or air circulation, these voids quickly became dead zones, sealed off from the living quarters by heavy pine trapdoors and reinforced floor joists. Yet, far from being inert space, these subterranean channels ran directly beneath the girls' ground-floor bedrooms, allowing even the faint scraping of an animal or a settling foundation beam to reverberate upward through the subflooring like a hollow drumbeat. Upstairs, the architecture was equally deceptive. The home's central brick chimney stack, measuring several feet wide at its base, dominated the interior core of the house. Over 200 years of renovations, generations of the Arnold family built interior plaster walls around this central stack to create distinct, smaller living quarters. This practice left substantial hollow chambers behind the plaster, unventilated vertical shafts running straight from the stone cellar up to the drafty attic space. These chimney voids acted as natural speaking tubes, drawing cold air, moisture, and sound straight through the core of the structure. A muffled whisper uttered near the cellar hearth could travel invisibly up through the hidden plaster gaps and emerge clearly in an upstairs hallway. Perhaps the most eerie architectural anomaly was the existence of hidden wall cavities and false closets scattered throughout the second floor. In several rooms, secondary partition walls had been erected directly over old, unused doorways without removing the original oak frames or wooden doors. This created shallow, sealed voids, spaces only a few inches deep trapped between layers of lath, plaster, and historical wood. To an occupant standing inside a bedroom, these spaces were completely invisible. But to anyone listening closely in the dark, they provided a hollow chamber where structural shifting, thermal expansion, or localized pressure changes produced rhythmic, knocking sounds that sounded eerily deliberate. When the Perron family moved in, they were living inside an intricate physical web. Every room was flanked by hidden cavities, backed by brick chimney shafts, or suspended directly over raw fieldstone crawl spaces. The physical layout of the home made it impossible to isolate the source of any disturbance. Every sound bounced off concealed masonry, every draft was channeled through hollow plaster, and every drop in temperature pool drifted into the subterranean cellars beneath their feet. The house was quite literally designed to harbor secrets within its walls. Desperate for answers about the secret spaces beneath their feet, the Perrons called in the two most famous demonologists in America. The Warren investigation. By late 1973, news of the escalating events inside the old Arnold estate had spread beyond the rural borders of Burrillville. Intrigued by reports of an aggressive, intelligent manifestation in Rhode Island, Ed and Lorraine Warren, America's most prominent self-styled demonologists, arrived at the farmhouse doorstep. Ed, a World War II veteran and former police officer, approached investigations with technical audio monitors, electromagnetic sensors, and photographic gear, while Lorraine relied on her reported clairvoyant faculties. The moment Lorraine crossed the thresholds of the central kitchen, she stopped in her tracks, clutching her head as if struck by a sudden spike in barometric pressure. She asserted that the atmosphere was heavy, with an ancient, deeply entrenched malice, a force she immediately linked to a 19th-century matriarch who had once lived on the property. The Warrens declared that the household was facing an advanced tier of demonic infestation aimed at systematically breaking the family's psychological stamina to achieve full vessel possession, specifically targeting Carolyn. To identify the exact nature of the entity anchored within the home's subterranean cavities, the Warrens arranged a high-stakes midnight séance inside the central parlor. On the night of the ritual, a small group gathered around a heavy wooden table. The Warrens brought along a medium, local clergy members, and technical assistants equipped with audio tape reels and flash cameras. What began as a series of low, whispered incantations quickly devolved into absolute terror. As the ritual deepened, the ambient temperature in the parlor plummeted within seconds, causing the breath of every observer in the room to turn into thick white plumes of fog. According to eyewitness accounts from the family, most notably documented by the eldest daughter, Andrea Perron, the physical reaction was immediate and horrifying. Carolyn Perron went completely rigid in her seat. Her eyes rolled backward into her skull, and her torso began to contort unnaturally, twisting as if gripped by massive, invisible hands. Before the eyes of her terrified husband and children, Carolyn was violently lifted, her chair elevating off the pine floorboards before hurling her across the room into the adjacent parlor. When she crashed onto the floorboards, she did not cry out. Instead, she began vocalizing in an unrecognizable guttural cadence, a harsh, distorted voice that sounded entirely detached from her human vocal cords. Audio equipment brought to record the event malfunctioned instantly, outputting loud bursts of static white noise, while sensors in the basement recorded massive voltage drops. Rather than cleansing the house, the séance acted as a violent lightning rod. The entity, provoked by the attempted intervention, lashed out with unprecedented hostility. Seeing his wife battered, contorted, and bleeding on the floor, Roger Perron snapped, horrified by the escalation and convinced the investigators had put his wife's life in direct jeopardy. Roger forcefully ejected Ed and Lorraine Warren from the property, forbidding them from ever setting foot on the acreage again. The heavy oak front door was slammed shut behind them, but the seal had already been broken. Decades after the Warrens left, modern investigators finally pried open the floorboards to see what was actually hiding down there. Physical discoveries under the boards. When the Perron family finally vacated the property in 1981, the home fell silent once more, but its architecture remained a physical repository of hidden secrets. Decades later, when new owners and investigative teams bought the farm to turn it into an active preservation site, they stopped viewing the house merely through the lens of lore and began physically exploring the building itself. Equipped with modern tools, borescope cameras, thermal imagers, floor-penetrating radar, and structural excavation kits, researchers began prying open the house's oldest, unsealed spaces to see what 2 centuries of residence had left behind. The most compelling discoveries occurred beneath the floorboards of the main floor and within the fieldstone voids of the original cellar. Prying up pine planks that had been nailed shut during late 19th century renovations revealed concealed floor cavities filled with curious historical artifacts. Among the dust and aging insulation, investigators uncovered personal items intentionally tucked away into dry joist spaces, 18th century iron nails, broken bone-handled utensils, fragments of hand-blown glass bottles, and worn leather shoe soles. In early New England folklore, burying single shoes or iron objects within wall cavities and under thresholds was a common protective practice, a custom known as concealed shoe traditions intended to trap unwanted energies or ward off malicious forces. The house was quite literally lined with physical wards built directly into its framework. Down in the stone basement, excavations near the infamous dirt room yielded even stranger anomalies. As crews cleared centuries of accumulated silt along the interior foundation walls, they uncovered an unmapped, dry-stacked stone archway that had been entirely backfilled with soil and fieldstones. When cleared, the arch revealed a small, sealed masonry niche built directly adjacent to the home's main central fireplace chimney. Inside this cold, airless void, researchers did not find human remains or dramatic occult altars. Instead, they discovered preserved artifacts of daily farm life that appeared to have been deliberately walled off: old metal lanterns, rusted animal traps, and charred wooden beams bearing distinct hand-carved scorch marks known as Marian marks or witch marks, historically burned into timber to protect homes from lightning and bad spirits. Further structural probes into the second-floor walls revealed that the sound pathways reported by the Perron family were not purely imagined. Behind the bedroom plaster, investigators mapped a complex network of forgotten ventilation flues and hollow chimney chases that connected the basement's dirt floor straight to the roof rafters. These physical channels accounted for the rapid dramatic temperature drops that flooded specific rooms, acting as thermal chimneys that sucked ice-cold basement air straight up into the second-floor sleeping quarters whenever exterior drafts shifted. The physical objects recovered from these spaces provided tangible evidence that the home's previous occupants were acutely aware of the strange nature of their living environment. Every generation had left behind a layer of physical defenses: sealing doors, burying iron under floorboards, and walling off structural voids. The secret rooms and hidden cavities had not been constructed for mysterious rituals, but out of a desperate, practical need to control the harsh environment, seal away structural damage, and wall off the unknown corners of a sprawling colonial estate. With every artifact pulled from the dirt, one chilling question remains: did they clear the house, or did they just wake it back up? Why the boundary never closed? The unsealing of the physical voids within the old Arnold estate did not mark the end of its lingering mystery. Instead, it solidified the property's status as a perpetual echo chamber where human memory, physical structure, and historical tragedy remain tightly entwined. When physical objects are pulled from beneath 18th century floorboards, or when concealed stone niches are opened to the modern air, they do not simply resolve old rumors. They expose the tangible reality that this modest farmhouse in Burrillville was lived in, altered, and feared by generations of occupants who all left their own marks on its timber and stone. The home was built during an era when survival meant building tight, defensible spaces against the brutal elements of rural New England. Every stone stacked in the foundation and every wooden beam framed around the central fireplace was cut with a specific functional purpose. Yet, as the decades rolled on and tragedy continuously visited the property's inhabitants, from sudden childhood illnesses to violent farm accidents, the house naturally accumulated a heavy narrative weight. The structural oddities meant to trap heat or drain moisture slowly became interpreted as something far darker: intentional hideaways, physical traps, and conduits for unexplainable energy. When subsequent owners took possession of the estate throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries, many reported that the heavy, suffocating atmosphere described by the Perron family in the 70s had never truly dissipated. Modern paranormal researchers equipped with sensitive audio gear, infrared cameras, and electromagnetic sensors continue to document inexplicable environmental shifts within the same localized zones. The stone-walled dirt room in the cellar, the narrow second-floor hallways, and the spatial voids behind the central chimney. Whether these phenomena stem from unusual subterranean geology, low-frequency electromagnetic fields created by mineral deposits in the surrounding fieldstone, or an enduring psychic imprint left behind by centuries of human suffering, the physical structure continues to act as a catalyst for human experience. What makes the story of the Arnold estate so uniquely compelling is that it defies easy categorization. It is not merely a tale of shadowy apparitions or exaggerated folklore. It is a complex tapestry woven from real land deeds, recorded colonial deaths, architectural oddities, and the deeply personal accounts of those who resided within its walls. The hidden rooms and sealed cavities discovered by researchers were not mystical portals created by supernatural forces, but physical responses crafted by real human hands trying to navigate an unforgiving landscape. Every sealed door, every buried shoe, and every altered partition wall reflects a human family attempting to carve out security against the unknown. As long as the old farmhouse continues to stand along Round Top Road, resting quietly on its 1736 fieldstone foundation, its secrets will never fully fade into the surrounding forest. The structure remains a living monument to the past, a place where the physical wood and stone hold fast to the memories of everyone who ever crossed its threshold. The secret rooms may have been opened, mapped, and catalogued, but the silence that settles over the house late at night still carries a haunting question. When you step into the dark of an ancient place, are you merely observing history, or is the history quietly watching you back? Well, when the real-world terror reached its limit, cinema stepped in to transform a local Rhode Island nightmare into a global phenomenon. How the farmhouse reshaped modern pop culture. When director James Wan released The Conjuring in July 2013, he did not merely adapt a local ghost story. He triggered a massive cultural phenomenon that permanently altered the landscape of modern horror cinema. The script drew heavily from the memoirs of Perron and the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren, translating the atmosphere of the 1736 Burrillville farmhouse into a cinematic goldmine. However, to turn a real-life family's 10-year ordeal into a 2-hour theatrical experience, Hollywood engaged in a delicate dance between historical accounts and theatrical exaggeration. The result was a film that grossed over $300 million worldwide, ignited a multi-billion-dollar cinematic universe, and fundamentally changed how the public perceives haunted real estate. The film took several creative liberties that reshaped the public's understanding of the Rhode Island property. While the real-life Perrons experienced a slow 10-year burn of subtle hauntings, strange smells, and acoustic anomalies, the movie condensed their experience into a terrifying, action-packed timeline. The film elevated Bathsheba Sherman into a grotesque, demonic antagonist, portraying her as a 19th-century witch who sacrificed an infant to Satan and hanged herself from an oak tree on the property. In reality, historical local archives and municipal records paint a drastically different picture. Bathsheba Sherman was an ordinary local farmer's wife who died of natural causes in old age and was buried peacefully in a nearby churchyard. Yet, Hollywood's terrifying exaggeration turned her name into a globally recognized horror villain. Beyond changing historical details, The Conjuring popularized specific paranormal tropes that have since become staples of 21st-century horror media. The film brought the concept of demonology and supernatural investigation into mainstream pop culture, transforming Ed and Lorraine Warren into larger-than-life horror heroes. The movie's signature scares, such as the infamous clap game in the dark, the mysterious stopping of clocks at 3:07 a.m., and the lingering threat of the central basement, were so visually striking that they generated thousands of internet memes, parodies, and homages across YouTube, TikTok, and television. The farmhouse on Round Top Road almost overnight became the gold standard for what a haunted house should look and feel like in the public imagination. This explosive cinematic popularity brought immediate, real-world consequences to the actual physical property in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Prior to 2013, The isolated farm sat in relative obscurity, known primarily to local historians and avid readers of regional ghost lore. Once the movie became a global box office smash, the serene countryside was flooded by waves of horror tourists, amateur investigators, and curious trespassers. Unprepared for the sudden onslaught of media attention, the family living in the home at the time faced constant invasions of privacy, fans scaling perimeter fences, shining flashlights through windows at 2 a.m., and lining the narrow dirt roads with parked cars. The phenomenon grew so disruptive that it led to high-profile civil lawsuits regarding property rights and public nuisance laws. Eventually, the house's pop culture footprint transformed it into a commercial commodity. Recognizing its massive pull on the horror community, subsequent owners fully embraced the film's legacy. The historic property was converted into a specialized destination for paranormal tourism, offering daytime historical tours, overnight investigatory stays, and live-streamed ghost hunting events. Influential YouTubers, television networks, and digital content creators routinely book stays at the estate, attempting to capture audio glitches, thermal drops, or shadowy figures in the very same basement made famous on the silver screen. The legacy of the house extends far beyond a single movie. The 2013 film launched the Conjuring universe, a sprawling horror franchise that includes sequels, spin-offs like Annabelle and The Nun, and countless copycat productions across global cinema. Yet, through all the CGI demons, theatrical jump scares, and Hollywood spin-offs, the ultimate anchor of the entire franchise remains that original 18th-century New England farmhouse. The film proved that the public has an insatiable appetite for true stories rooted in physical places, ensuring that the legacy of the old Arnold estate will continue to echo across popular culture for generations to come. If you enjoyed diving into the dark history, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next one.